She was taken to the hospital. Then her little boy pointed at the Billionaire CEO and whispered, "Daddy? Good evening, family. Welcome back to Mr. Steele Rich Stories. Before we jump in, I want to say thank you. Over 700 of you watched our last story, and that means the world. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join us for stories that matter. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. Now, let's get into tonight's story. The hallway smelled antiseptic and worried. Nyla Monroe sat beside the gurney where her mother had been resting moments. Before, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. The nurses had wheeled her mom into the back for tests, something about iron levels and exhaustion that wouldn't lift. Nyla barely remembered the ambulance ride. She only remembered her mother's face going grey in the kitchen, the way her knees buckled, and how Nolan had screamed. Now her son sat on the floor beside her chair, his legs crossed, his dinosaur backpack still strapped to his shoulders. He'd refused to take it off. 7 years old and already carrying weight no child should have to hold. The doors at the end of the corridor swung open. Footsteps echoed, expensive shoes on linoleum. Nyla didn't look up at first. Hospitals were full of people in a hurry. But then the footsteps slowed. Someone stopped walking. She felt the shift before she saw it. The air grew heavier, like the moment before thunder. She lifted her eyes. 4 people stood 10 feet away. 2 administrators in pressed suits, a woman with a tablet, and him, Lucas Thorne. He looked exactly like he did in the articles, tall, composed, eyes the color of winter sky that never seemed to blink. His coat was unbuttoned, charcoal wool over a white shirt. No tie. His jaw was clean-shaven, sharp enough to cut glass. He wasn't looking at the administrators. He was looking at her. No. He was looking at Nolan. Her son had gone completely still. His small hands were flat on the tile, his head tilted up. And then he did something Nyla would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. He whispered it, just loud enough to be heard. "Daddy." The word hung in the air like smoke. The administrators froze. The woman with the tablet blinked twice, confusion rippling across her face. Lucas didn't move. He didn't flinch. But something shifted behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or the ghost of it. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Nyla's breath stopped. Her chest felt hollow. She reached down instinctively and placed a hand on Nolan's shoulder, but he didn't pull away. He just kept staring at Lucas, waiting for an answer that hadn't come yet. One of the administrators cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne, we can—" Lucas raised one hand, silencing him without a word. His gaze finally left Nolan and found Nyla. She met it head-on, even though her pulse was hammering in her throat. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't ashamed. But she was terrified, not of him, of what this moment could break. Because Nolan had never asked about his father before. Not once. Not in 7 years. He'd never pushed, never begged for stories, never demanded answers. He'd simply existed in the life they'd built, the two of them and her mother, in a rented duplex. On the south side, where every dollar mattered and every decision came with sacrifice. And now he'd said the word, out loud, in front of strangers, in front of the man who might actually be the answer. Lucas took one step forward, just one. His shoes clicked softly on the tile. The administrators exchanged glances, uncertain whether to follow or fade into the background. The woman with the tablet lowered it slowly, her eyes darting between Nyla and Lucas like she was watching something private unfold in public. "Nyla," Lucas said. Her name in his mouth felt like a key turning in a lock she hadn't touched in years. She hadn't heard him say her name in nearly 8 years, not since the night they'd sat on the rooftop of his building, sharing wine, and watching the city lights blur into something that felt like possibility. Not since the morning she'd left his apartment with her shoes in her hand. The quiet understanding that whatever they'd had was never meant to last. He'd been different then, younger, less polished, still building the empire that would eventually put his face on magazine. covers and his name in boardroom conversations across 3 continents. She'd been a consultant on one of his early acquisitions, brought in to assess company culture, employee satisfaction, the invisible threads that held organizations together. They worked late. We talked later, and for 6 weeks, they'd existed in a space that felt separate from the rest of the world. Then the project ended. She went back to her life. He went back to his house. No promises, no drama, just a quiet closing of a door neither of them tried to reopen. Until now. Nolan shifted beside her, his hand reaching up to grip the edge of her sleeve. He wasn't scared, not exactly, but he was waiting, watching, trying to understand why the man in the expensive coat was looking at his mother like he was solving an equation in his head. Lucas took another step. Closer, now. Close enough that Nyla could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. He looked tired. Not physically. Lucas Thorne didn't get tired, but there was something worn in the way he held himself, like a man who'd been running on discipline and caffeine for too long. "I didn't know," he said quietly. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. It was just a fact, delivered in that same even tone he probably used in negotiations. But there was something underneath it, something raw that hadn't been smoothed over yet. Nyla nodded once. "I know." Because she did. She'd never told him, never reached out, never sent a message or made a call or tried to pull him into a life he hadn't signed up for. She'd made that choice deliberately, carefully, the same way she made every choice that mattered. And she didn't regret it. But sitting here now, watching her son look at his father for the first time, she wondered if she'd made the choice for the right reasons, or just the easy ones. One of the administrators shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. The woman with the tablet looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall. This wasn't the kind of moment that belonged in a hospital corridor with witnesses and overhead lighting. This was the kind of moment that should have happened in private, with time and space to breathe. But life didn't wait for perfect timing. Lucas crouched down, slowly, deliberately. He lowered himself until he was at Nolan's eye level, his coat brushing the tile. Nolan's grip on Nyla's sleeve tightened, but he didn't look away. "What's your name?" Lucas asked. His voice was softer now, gentler. Not the boardroom voice. Not the voice that commanded rooms and closed deals. This was something else. "Nolan," her son whispered. Lucas nodded. "That's a good name." Nolan's shoulders relaxed slightly. "My grandma picked it. She has good taste." A pause. Then Nolan asked the question Nyla had been dreading. "Are you my dad?" The administrators looked at each other. The woman with the tablet actually took a step back, as if giving them space might somehow undo the fact that she'd witnessed this. Nyla's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Lucas didn't answer right away. He looked at Nolan, really looked at him, studied his face like he was searching for something familiar. And maybe he found it. Maybe he saw his own eyes staring back at him, or the shape of his jaw in miniature, or some echo of himself that couldn't be denied. "I think I might be," Lucas said finally, "but I need to talk to your mum first. Is that okay?" Nolan considered this. Then he nodded. "Okay." Lucas stood. His gaze shifted back to Nyla, and this time there was a question in it. Not accusation, not anger, just a quiet request for understanding. She stood too, her legs unsteady. "My mom collapsed this morning. Low iron, they said. But she's been exhausted for weeks. They're running tests now." "I heard," Lucas said. "That's why I'm here." "The hospital called. They needed approval for some of the diagnostic work. Your mother listed me as her emergency contact years ago. I didn't realize until today." Nyla blinked. "What?" "She worked for one of my companies, briefly, about 7 years ago. Accounting department. She must have put my name down then and never updated it." The pieces clicked together. Her mother had taken that job right after Nolan was born, something temporary to help with bills. She'd quit after 4 months because the commute was too long and childcare didn't make sense, but she'd kept the insurance information, keep the paperwork, and apparently kept Lucas Thorne's name in a file somewhere. "She never told me," Nyla said. She probably didn't think it mattered. But it did. It mattered now. Because here he was, standing in a hospital hallway, staring at a child who looked like him and a woman he hadn't thought about in years. Or maybe he had. Maybe she'd crossed his mind in quiet moments, the way he'd crossed hers. Maybe he'd wondered what happened to the consultant with the sharp eyes, and the easy laugh who disappeared without asking for anything. Now she was asking, not with words, but with the weight of the moment. Lucas glanced at the administrators. "Give us a minute." It wasn't a request. They nodded and retreated down the hallway, murmuring to each other in low tones. The woman with the tablet followed, casting one last glance over her shoulder before disappearing around the corner. Now it was just the three of them. Nyla, Nolan, Lucas, the man who might be a father, the boy who needed one, the woman caught between protecting her son and giving him the truth. If you were in Nyla's place, do you speak first or wait for him to? Lucas took one more step forward, close enough now that she could see the exact color of his eyes, gray with flecks of blue like winter sky breaking into dawn. He said her name again, softer this time, Nyla. And then the memory hit her. The memory faded, but not completely. It never did. Nyla had learned to live with ghosts. Not the haunting kind, just the quiet presence of moments that refused to dissolve entirely. Lucas was one of them. But so was the version of herself who'd believed she could build something lasting with a man whose world moved too fast for roots. Harborview wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. It sat 40 minutes south of the city, tucked between the coast and a stretch of farmland that still smelled like earth after rain. The main street had 12 blocks of old brick buildings, most of them built in the 1920s when the town had been a fishing hub. Now it was quieter, smaller, the kind of place where people knew your name at the post office and the grocery. Store clerk asked about your mother's health without needing to check a chart. Nyla had moved here when she was 6 months pregnant. Her mother had found the duplex, 2 bedrooms, cracked tile in the bathroom, a backyard, with a lemon tree that produced fruit too sour to eat but too beautiful to cut down. The rent was manageable. The neighbors were kind, and nobody asked questions she didn't want to answer. She'd built a life here, not a loud one, not the kind that attracted attention or required explanation, just a steady rhythm of work and care and small joys that added up to something solid. Mornings started at 4:30. She'd wake before the sun, slip out of bed without disturbing Nolan, and make the 10-minute walk to Harborview Cafe. The owner, David Miller, had hired her 3 months after she'd moved to town, no resume required. He'd just asked if she could bake and show up on time. She could. She did. By 5 o'clock, she'd have the ovens warming and the first batch of cinnamon rolls rising. The smell would fill the kitchen, butter and sugar and yeast, the kind of smell that made people slow down when they walked past the windows. By 6, David would arrive with his thermos of coffee and his tablet full of supplier invoices. By 7, the morning rush would start. Nyla liked the quiet hours best, the ones before customers arrived, when it was just her and the dough and the rhythm of kneading. There was something meditative about it, the push and fold, the way flour dusted her hands, the knowledge that what she made would feed people. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. She'd finish her shift at noon, walk home, and switch gears. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons, she taught digital literacy classes at the community center. Basic stuff. How to set up email accounts, navigate job boards, use video calls to stay connected with family. Most of her students were older, folks who'd spent their lives working with their hands and now needed to prove they could work with screens too. She was good at it. Patient, clear. She never made anyone feel foolish for asking questions. She remembered what it felt like to be lost in a world that assumed you already knew the rules. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons she spent with Nolan. Homework, snacks, walks to the park where he'd climb the old oak tree and pretend he was a ship captain scanning the horizon for danger. She'd sit on the bench below, reading or just watching, letting him be a kid in a world that felt safe enough to explore. Evenings were hers and her mother's, cooking together, watching game shows, folding laundry while Nolan colored at the kitchen table. Her mother, Rebecca, had raised Nyla the same way, with routines, with rituals, with the belief that love wasn't something you declared in grand speeches. It was something you did, every day, in small, unglamorous ways that nobody applauded. Rebecca had taught her that consistency mattered more than intensity, that showing up mattered more than showing off, that a child needed to know the ground beneath them wouldn't shift without warning. Nyla had built Nolan's world on that foundation, and it had held. Nights with Nolan were her favorite time. After dinner, after Rebecca had retreated to her room with her crossword, puzzles and herbal tea, Nyla would sit with her son on the couch. Sometimes they'd read, sometimes they'd just talk. He'd tell her about school, about the frog they'd found in the playground, about the spelling test he'd aced, about the girl in his class who could draw dragons better than anyone he'd ever seen. And sometimes, when the day had been long or the world felt too big, he'd ask her to tell him the lighthouse story. It wasn't a real lighthouse. Harborview didn't have one. But there was an old stone tower at the edge of town, built decades ago as a water tower and abandoned when the new system went in. Kids called it the lighthouse because it stood alone on a hill overlooking the ocean, and, on clear nights, you could see the stars reflected in the windows like distant ships. Nyla had turned it into a story for him. A gentle one. Once upon a time, she'd begin, her voice soft. There was a lighthouse keeper who loved the sea more than anything. Every night he'd light the lamp and guide ships safely to shore. But one summer, a storm came, a big one, and the lighthouse keeper had to make a choice, stay in the tower where it was safe, or go down to the shore to help the sailors who were lost. Nolan would lean against her shoulder, his eyes half closed, listening. He went down to the shore, because that's what good people do. They show up when it matters, even if it's hard. And when the storm passed, the sailors thanked him. But he didn't stay. He went back to his lighthouse, because that's where he belonged. And the sailors went back to the sea because that's where they belonged. Did they ever see each other again? Nolan would ask, even though he knew the answer. Maybe, Nyla would say, when the timing was right, when the sea was calm and the lighthouse was ready. It was her way of telling him the truth, without breaking his heart, that some people come into your life for a season. That love doesn't always mean staying. That timing matters, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone go until the world is ready to hold what you have together. She'd never said the story was about his father, but she thought maybe someday he'd understand. Nyla had always chosen steady over spectacle. It wasn't a wound, exactly, more like a framework, a way of seeing the world that had been shaped by watching her mother. Work 3 jobs to keep the lights on, by seeing friends chase, relationships that burned bright and left nothing but ash, by learning that the loudest promises were usually the emptiest. She'd dated in her 20s. A few serious relationships, a few that felt like they might go somewhere, but none of them lasted. Not because the men were bad, most of them were decent, but because Nyla had standards that didn't bend. She needed someone who showed up, not just in the beginning, when everything was easy, but in the middle, when life got boring and hard. She needed someone who understood that love was built in the margins, in the grocery runs and the late-night fevers, and the conversations that didn't solve anything but made you feel less alone. Lucas had been different. He'd been excited, ambitious, the kind of man who talked about the future like it was something he could shape with his bare hands. And for 6 weeks, she'd let herself believe that maybe spectacle and steady could coexist. But she'd known better. She'd always known better. When the project ended and he'd asked if she wanted to keep seeing him, she'd said no, not because she didn't care, but because she could see the shape of his life, the late nights, the constant travel, the way his phone never stopped ringing. She could see that he was building something that required all of him. And she didn't want to be the person waiting in the wings, hoping for scraps of attention between board meetings. So she walked away. Clean. Quiet. No drama. And then, 2 months later, she found out she was pregnant. She could have told him. She knew that. She'd written the email a dozen times, picked up the phone twice, but every time she'd stop herself, because she knew what would happen. He'd offer money, support, maybe even a relationship built on obligation rather than choice, and she didn't want that. Not for herself, not for her child. She wanted Nolan to be loved because he was lovable, not because he was a responsibility someone felt guilty about shirking. So she'd kept the truth to herself, not hidden, just held, waiting for a room that could hold it without turning it into something ugly. Nolan had his father's eyes, that winter sky color that seemed to shift depending on the light. Some days they looked blue, some days silver. Nyla had noticed it the moment he was born, and she'd spent 7 years watching that color deepen. She'd never pointed it out, never made it a thing, but she saw it. Every time he looked at her with those serious, steady eyes, she saw Lucas staring back. There were other things too, small rituals that had become the architecture of their life. Friday nights, they walked to the community center for empanada night. Sofia Rodriguez made them fresh, beef, chicken, cheese and spinach, and sold them for $2 each to raise money for the after-school program. Nolan always got beef. Nyla rotated. Rebecca got one of each, and shared bites with anyone who asked. There was Clover, the street dog who'd claimed their block as her territory. She was a mutt, part terrier, part something shaggy, all personality, no collar, no owner. But every morning she'd be waiting by their gate, and Nolan would save a piece of his breakfast to share. Nyla had tried to catch her once, to take her to a shelter, but Clover was too smart for that. She liked her freedom. She just also liked having friends. There was the community center itself, a converted church with stained glass windows and creaky floors. It smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. Nyla taught her classes there. Nolan did art projects there. Rebecca volunteered at the food pantry there. It was the heart of Harborview, the place where people gathered when they needed help or wanted to give it. These were the things that mattered, not the grand gestures. Not the headlines, just the daily rituals that held a life together. What's one small daily ritual that keeps you steady? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what grounds you. And then, one day, a good man came to town to learn how to listen. That's how Rebecca had described him when she came home from work that first week. She'd been excited, more animated than Nyla had seen her in months. There's a new program at the office, Rebecca had said. Some company owner is doing this thing where he works regular jobs for a week at a time, trying to understand his employees better. He's in accounting this month. Quiet guy, polite, ask good questions. Nyla hadn't thought much of it. Rich people did strange things to feel connected to the world they'd left behind. It was probably performative, probably meaningless, but Rebecca kept talking about him, how he'd helped her troubleshoot a software issue, how he'd bought lunch for the whole department, how he'd stayed late to finish a report so she wouldn't have to. He listens, Rebecca had said. Really listen. Like he actually cares about the answers. Nyla had smiled and nodded and forgotten about it. Until the day she'd picked Rebecca up from work and seen him in the parking lot. Lucas Thorne, standing beside a modest sedan, talking to another employee like they were old friends. He'd looked up, seen her. And for one brief, terrible moment, the world had stopped moving. Nyla hadn't planned to see him again after that moment in the parking lot. She'd driven Rebecca home, said nothing about recognizing him, and spent the evening convincing herself it didn't matter. Lucas was passing through, a week, maybe 2. Then he'd return to whatever mountaintop billionaires lived on, and life would go back to normal. But 3 days later, he showed up at the community center. It was a Saturday morning. Nyla was setting up for her digital literacy class, arranging laptops on folding, tables, checking the Wi-Fi, making sure the whiteboard markers actually worked. The center was busy. Sofia was prepping for the food pantry distribution. A group of teenagers were painting a mural on the back wall. Someone's toddler was racing through the hallways, laughing like freedom itself. The front door opened, and Lucas walked in carrying a paper bag that smelled like heaven. He wasn't wearing a suit, Just jeans, a grey sweater, and boots that had actually seen some use. His hair was slightly messy, like he'd forgotten to check a mirror. He looked around the room with the careful attention of someone trying not to intrude. Sophia spotted him first. "Can I help you?" "I brought empanadas," he said, lifting the bag slightly. "Rebecca mentioned you make them for fundraisers." "I thought I'd contribute." Sophia's eyes narrowed with suspicion, then softened. "You're the guy from her office." "I am. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to." Sophia took the bag, peeked inside, and her whole face changed. "These are from Rosalita's downtown. You went all the way there?" Rebecca said they were the best, and just like that, Sophia decided he was acceptable. She handed him a name tag and pointed toward the sign-in table. "Make yourself useful. Write down names and what people are here for. Can you manage that?" "I can manage that." Nyla watched this exchange from across the room, her hands frozen on a laptop cord. He hadn't looked at her yet, hadn't announced himself. He'd just walked in, brought food, and volunteered for the least glamorous job in the building. She waited for the performance to start, the moment when he'd pull out his phone to take photos for social media, the announcement that he was doing charity work, the subtle reminders that he was someone important slumming it with regular people. But it never came. He just sat down at the table, picked up the pen, and started writing names. An hour into the morning, the printer died. It was an old machine, donated 3 years ago by someone's uncle's office, and it had been dying slowly for months. But today, it finally gave up completely. Jammed paper, error codes flashing, the kind of mechanical death that required either a professional or a miracle. Nyla was kneeling beside it, trying to pry out the crumpled paper when Lucas appeared beside her. "Need help?" he asked. "Unless you're secretly a printer repair technician, probably not." "I'm not. But I've fought with enough office equipment to know a few tricks." He crouched down, examined the error code, and started disassembling the paper tray with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before. No hesitation, no grandstanding, just quiet competence. "You've done this before," Nyla said. "I worked in a copy shop during college, paid better than you'd think." He didn't elaborate, didn't turn it into a story about his humble beginnings or his work ethic. He just fixed the printer, wiped his hands on his jeans, and went back to the sign-in table. Nyla stood there for a moment, holding the paper she'd been trying to extract, feeling something shift in her chest. By noon, he'd helped 3 more people. Thomas Santos needed help understanding a tax form. Lucas sat with him for 20 minutes, breaking down each line in clear, simple language. No jargon, no condescension, just patience. A teenage girl named Keisha was trying to organize charging cables for a phone drive she was running at school. She'd bought a label maker but couldn't figure out how to load the tape. Lucas watched her struggle for exactly 3 seconds before offering to help. Together, they labeled 40 cables in neat color-coded bags. By the time they finished, Keisha was explaining her plan to expand the drive to other schools. And Lucas was listening like she was pitching the most important idea he'd heard all week. Nyla caught herself watching him, the way he made space for people, the way he asked questions that made them feel smart rather than small, the way he moved through the room like he belonged there, not because he'd bought his way in but because he was genuinely useful. The rain started just after 2 o'clock, not a drizzle, a full Pacific storm that turned the street into a river and sent everyone scrambling for cover. Nyla had been helping pack up the food pantry tables when the first drops hit. Within seconds, it was a downpour. She grabbed the last box of canned goods and ran for the awning that covered the side entrance. Lucas was already there, holding the door open for Sophia and 2 other volunteers. Water dripped from his hair. His sweater was soaked through. But he stayed in the rain until everyone else was inside, then finally ducked under the awning beside Nyla. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Do what?" "Stand in the rain. You're drenched." He looked down at himself like he hadn't noticed. "I'll dry." They stood there for a moment, watching the rain hammer the pavement. The street was empty now. Everyone had retreated indoors. It was just the 2 of them under a metal awning, surrounded by the sound of water and wind. "Rebecca talks about you," Lucas said quietly. Nyla's stomach tightened. Does she? She's proud of you. The work you do here. The way you show up for people. She raised me to show up. I can tell. Another beat of silence. Then he added, she mentioned you have a son. There it was. The question wasn't quite a question. Nyla kept her eyes on the rain. I do. His name is Nolan. He's 7. That's a good age. It is. She waited for the follow-up. The math. The timeline. But Lucas just nodded and let the conversation rest. Sophia appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. You two look like drowned cats. Drink these before you catch something. They took the mugs gratefully. The cocoa was too sweet and slightly burnt, but it was warm, and that was enough. How long are you staying in town? Nyla asked. I'm supposed to leave tomorrow, but I might extend it. Why? He looked at her then. Really looked, because I like it here. It feels real, and maybe it was the rain, or the cocoa, or the way he'd spent the whole day being useful without needing credit for it. But Nyla found herself smiling. It is real. That's the whole point. The rain stopped just before sunset. The sky turned pink and gold, and the street smelled like wet asphalt and salt air. Lucas walked her to her car. It should have been a 5-minute walk, but they took the long way. Down Main Street, past the shuttered antique, stores, and the bookshop with the crooked awning, all the way to the pier that stretched out over the water. They didn't talk much, just walked side by side, their footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. The pier was strung with white lights that flickered on as the sky darkened. A few other people were out, couples holding hands, a man walking his dog, a woman sketching the horizon. Nyla stopped at the railing and looked out at the ocean. The water was still choppy from the storm, grey waves rolling toward the shore in steady rhythm. I miss this, she said. The ocean? The quiet. The city is loud. Even when it's silent, it's loud. Here, the noise is just weather. Waves, wind, things that don't need anything from you. Lucas leaned against the railing beside her. Is that why you moved here? Partly. Mostly I moved here because I needed a place where I could breathe, where Nolan could grow up without the world pressing in on him. Sounds like you succeeded. I'm trying. He turned to face her, and suddenly the space between them felt smaller. Not uncomfortable. Just a present. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. When we worked together, that project in the city, did you feel it too? Her heart kicked against her ribs. Feel what? Like we could have been something, if the timing had been different. She met his eyes, those winter sky eyes that had stayed with her longer than she wanted to admit. Yes, I felt it. Why didn't you say anything? Because the timing wasn't different. You were building an empire. I was trying to build a life. Those aren't the same thing. He nodded slowly. They're not, but maybe they could be. Lucas, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that I thought about you after. More than I probably should have. The lights above them swayed slightly in the wind. Somewhere down the beach, someone was playing guitar, soft meandering chords that blended with the sound of the waves. Nyla took a breath. I thought about you too. He smiled then. Not the polished smile she'd seen in photos. Something quieter, more true. And then, without planning it, without deciding it was the right move, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, gentle, just a press of lips under string lights with the ocean murmuring below them. But it felt like an answer to a question neither of them had known how to ask. When she pulled back, he was still smiling. Come back tomorrow, she said, to the center. We could use the help. I'll be there. If you're feeling their chemistry through the work, tap-like, it helps more folks find these stories. But the next morning, his plans changed. Nyla was at the cafe, pulling cinnamon rolls from the oven, when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Emergency board meeting. I have to fly back to the city. I'm sorry. She stared at the message for a long moment. Disappointment settled in her chest, heavy and familiar. Of course, this was always how it went. The world pulled people like Lucas in 100 directions, and small-town community centers didn't make the priority list. But then another message came through. "Can I see you before I leave? Just for a minute?" She wiped flour from her hands and texted back, "I'm at Harborview Cafe until noon. I'll be there at 10. He arrived at 8, still wearing yesterday's jeans, but with a fresh shirt and a leather bag slung over his shoulder. He looked tired, stressed, like a man being pulled back into a world he'd briefly escaped. Nyla poured him coffee, black, no sugar, and wrapped up one of the morning's croissants in wax paper. "You don't have to apologize," she said before he could speak. "I get it. You have responsibilities." "I do. But I meant what I said, about wanting to stay." "Then stay." "I can't. Not right now. There's a merger falling apart. If I don't get back, 300 people will lose their jobs." She handed him the coffee and the croissant. "Then go. Do what you need to do." He took them, but he didn't move toward the door. "Can I come back? When will this be settled?" "You don't need my permission." "I know, but I'm asking anyway." Nyla pulled a napkin from the stack on the counter and wrote 3 words on it with a marker. "Come back, kindly." She folded it around the croissant and pressed it into his hand. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means, don't let that world make you hard. Don't let it take the part of you that sat with Thomas and labeled cables with Keisha. If you come back as that version of yourself, not the one who forgets how to listen." Lucas looked at the napkin, then at her. "I will." "Good." He kissed her then, quick and certain, a promise sealed in butter and coffee and the faint smell of yeast rising. And then he left. Nyla watched him walk to his car, watched him drive away, watched the street return to its normal rhythm. She didn't know if he'd come back, but she knew she'd meant what she wrote. He didn't come back the next week, or the week after that. Nyla told herself it didn't matter. She'd known what she was getting into. Men like Lucas didn't belong to small towns or quiet mornings or community centers that smelled like lemon cleaner. They belonged to boardrooms and time zones and problems that required immediate solutions. But he texted. At first, merger talks going longer than expected. "Miss the pier. Stuck in London for 3 more days. How's the centre? Fixed another printer today. Thought of you." Short messages, practical, but they came regularly, like he was trying to keep a thread connected even as the distance grew. Then the messages slowed. 1 every few days, then once a week. Then silence. Nyla didn't chase him. She'd never been the kind of woman who demanded explanations or sent desperate texts asking why someone had gone quiet. She just noted the absence and kept moving. Rebecca noticed. "You haven't mentioned him lately." "There's nothing to mention. He seemed like a good man." "He is, but good men still have lives that don't include us." Rebecca didn't push. She just squeezed Nyla's shoulder and went back to her crossword puzzle. What Nyla didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Lucas was drowning. The merger had collapsed spectacularly. 2 executives were fighting for control, threatening lawsuits that could tear the company apart. Legal teams were working around the clock. And in the middle of it all, his father had a stroke. Not severe, but enough to land him in the hospital for a week, enough to require months of recovery, enough to shift the entire weight of the family business onto Lucas's shoulders before he was ready to carry it. He tried to reach out, typed messages he never sent, picked up the phone and put it down again. Because what could he say? That he was trapped in a crisis he couldn't walk away from? That every time he thought about Harborview, it felt like remembering a dream he'd woken up from too soon. So he said nothing, and the silence became its own message. 6 weeks after he left, Nyla realized her period was late. Not just late, absent. She sat on the bathroom floor at 4 in the morning, staring at the pregnancy test. In her hand, watching the second line appear like a verdict she hadn't asked for. Pregnant. Her first thought wasn't panic. It was clear, sharp and immediate and undeniable. She was going to have this baby. That wasn't a question. The question was what to do about the father. She spent 3 days thinking, running through scenarios, weighing options. She didn't tell Rebecca. Didn't tell anyone. Just carried the knowledge alone, feeling it settle into her bones. On the 4th day, she drove to visit her grandmother. Grandma Mabel lived 20 miles inland, in a cottage surrounded by fruit trees and flower beds that looked like organized chaos. She was 83, sharp as ever, and the only person Nyla trusted to tell her the truth without sugarcoating it. They sat on the porch with tea, chamomile for Nyla, black for Mabel, and Nyla told her everything. Lucas, the pregnancy, the silence. Mabel listened without interrupting. When Nyla finished, she took a long sip of tea and set the cup down with deliberate care. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to keep the baby." "That's not what I asked. I asked what you want to do about him." Nyla looked out at the garden. A hummingbird hovered near the salvia, wings a blur of motion. "I don't know. Do you think he'd want to know?" "Probably. But I don't know if that's enough reason to tell him." Mabel nodded slowly. "Strong hearts don't need to carry everything alone, child. But they also don't need to hand their burdens to people who aren't ready to hold them." "How do I know if he's ready?" "You don't. That's the gamble. But you can ask yourself this. If you tell him, are you doing it because you need help, or because you think he deserves to choose?" Nyla turned that question over in her mind like a stone. "I think I'm doing it because if I don't, I'll always wonder if I stole that choice from him." "Then tell him. Write it down, send it, and whatever happens after, you'll know you did right by your own conscience." Nyla wrote the letter that night. She didn't make it dramatic, didn't plead or demand or try to manipulate him with guilt. She just told him the facts. "Lucas, I'm pregnant. The baby is yours. I'm not writing this to ask for anything, not money, not involvement, not a relationship. I'm writing because you deserve to know. I understand your life is complicated right now. I understand that this news might feel like another crisis you don't have bandwidth for. That's okay. I can do this alone. I have my mother. I have a community. I have everything I need to raise this child well. But if you want to be part of this, not out of obligation, but because you genuinely want to, then I'm open to that conversation. On your timeline. When you're ready. I'll be here." Nyla. She found his office address online. A foundation he'd started years ago for employee wellness programs. It seemed like the most private route, better than sending it to corporate headquarters where assistants would screen it. She mailed it on Tuesday. Certified. Signature required. And then she waited. 2 weeks later, the letter came back. Stamped in red. Return to sender. Addressee unknown. Nyla stood in her kitchen, staring at the envelope, feeling something crack inside her chest. The foundation had closed. She found the notice buried in a press release from 3 months ago. Budget cuts, restructuring, programs absorbed into the main company. She tried the corporate line, got transferred 4 times, left messages that were never returned, sent an email to a general inquiry address that bounced back with an auto-reply about high message volume. Every avenue she tried led nowhere, and slowly she began to understand that the world Lucas lived in had gates. Layers of protection designed to keep people like her on the outside. Not maliciously, just structurally, the way wealth and power always built walls without meaning to. 3 months later, she saw his face on the news. Rebecca had the television on during dinner, a business segment, and there he was, Lucas Thorne, standing at a podium, being officially named CEO of Thorne Industries following his father's retirement. He looked older, tired, the kind of tiredness that went deeper than missed sleep, but he stood straight, spoke clearly, fielded questions with the calm authority of someone who'd been trained for this his entire life. The anchor called him one of the youngest CEOs in the industry, mentioned his net worth, his philanthropic ventures, his reputation for turning struggling companies into success stories. Nyla's hand rested on her stomach. 5 months along now, starting to show. Rebecca glanced at her, then at the television, then back. She didn't say anything, but her eyes asked the question. Nyla shook her head slightly. Not now. That night, after Rebecca had gone to bed, Nyla sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper article she'd printed. There was a photo of Lucas shaking hands with board members, another of him standing in front of the company building, all glass and steel and ambition. She could reach out again, try harder, use the media attention to force a connection, show up at his office, make noise until someone listens. But every scenario she ran ended the same way. Her story becoming public, Nolan's existence became a headline, photographers, speculation, people dissecting her choices and his responsibilities in comment sections and gossip columns. She thought about Nolan, still just a flutter of movement in her belly, but already a person she loved more than air. And she thought about the world he'd be born into, the questions he'd face, the way people would look at him if his origin story was tabloid fodder. She thought about what Mabel had said. Strong hearts don't need to carry everything alone, but they also don't need to hand their burdens to people who aren't ready to hold them. Lucas wasn't ready. Maybe he never would be. His world was too big, too fast, too full of obligations that would always come before small-town women and surprise pregnancies. But she was ready. She had Rebecca. She had Harborview. She had a life that could hold this child with gentleness and dignity. Have you ever protected the truth until the room felt safe? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Nyla folded the article carefully, creased it along the same lines she'd creased it a dozen times already. She looked at Lucas's face in the photo, that serious expression, those eyes that Nolan would inherit, and she whispered to the empty kitchen, "Timing will tell us when, not if, when," because she believed, maybe naively, maybe stubbornly, that truth had a way of surfacing when the world was ready to hold it. That forcing a revelation before its time only shattered the fragile thing you were trying to protect. So she made her choice, not out of fear, not out of pride, but out of a deep, bone-level certainty that Nolan deserved to enter the world without chaos, that his story deserved to begin in peace. She would tell him someday, when he was old enough to understand, when he asked the questions she knew would eventually come. And if Lucas ever found out, if the universe ever created the right conditions for that truth to land gently, well, she'd deal with that when it happened. For now, she had a nursery to prepare, a life to build, a son to meet. She put the article in a folder, filed it away with the returned letter and the pregnancy test she'd kept, evidence of a truth that was waiting for its moment. And 4 months later, on a clear morning in March, Nolan Elias Monroe was born. He came into the world crying, a strong, healthy wail that filled the delivery room with sound. Rebecca was there, holding Nyla's hand, tears streaming down her face. The nurses cleaned him and wrapped him and placed him on Nyla's chest. And when Nyla looked into her son's eyes, those winter sky eyes that held flecks of blue like breaking dawn, she knew she'd made the right choice. Not because it was easy, but because it was hers. The truth would wait. And when the time came, when the room was finally big enough and safe enough to hold it, she would speak it. Until then, she would love this boy with everything she had. And that would be enough. Nolan Elias Monroe arrived on March 14th at 6:32 in the morning, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and eyes that would shift from newborn blue to winter sky grey within his first month of life. He had a dimple in his left cheek that only showed when he smiled, really smiled, not the polite version he'd learn later. And he had a habit, even as an infant, of going very still when he was thinking, like he was counting something invisible, processing the world in careful increments. Rebecca called him an old soul. Nyla just called him hers. The first year was a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. Nolan is learning to roll over, to sit up, to say mama in a voice that sounded like wonder. Rebecca took family leave from her accounting job to help, and together they built a routine that worked, shifts of feeding and changing and soothing, punctuated by moments of pure joy when Nolan would laugh at something only he understood. The community showed up too, not loudly, not invasively, just in the ways that mattered. Meals appeared on the doorstep, casseroles from Sophia, soup from Thomas Santos, fresh bread from David at the cafe. No notes demanding thanks, no expectations of reciprocation, just food wrapped in foil with reheating instructions written in careful handwriting. Text messages arrived at odd hours. No need to answer. Just wanted you to know we're thinking of you. When Nolan was 6 months old and Nyla went back to work, 3 different neighbors volunteered to watch him on rotation. They refused payment, called it a privilege, said things like, "It takes a village and we look after our own here." Harborview wasn't perfect, but it held them. By the time Nolan was 2, he was walking and talking and asking questions about everything. Why was the sky blue? Where did rain come from? Why did Clover the street dog sleep outside if she was everybody's friend? By 4, he was building elaborate block towers and narrating stories about knights and dragons and kingdoms that needed saving. He'd sit on the floor of the community center while Nyla taught her classes, arranging his toys in careful patterns, counting under his breath. By 7, he was reading chapter books and helping Rebecca with grocery lists, and asking questions that didn't have easy answers, questions about family and fairness, and why some people had more than others. He never asked about his father, not directly, but sometimes Nyla would catch him staring at other kids with their dads at the park, and she'd see something flicker across his face. Not sadness exactly, just curiosity, the awareness that his family looked different from others. She waited for the question, prepared answers that felt true without being cruel. But Nolan never pushed. He just accepted the shape of their life and found his place in it. The years moved in rhythms, seasons marked by community center events and school performances and small traditions that became the architecture of Nolan's childhood. Every Friday, empanada night. Every Sunday, I walked to the pier. Every month, volunteering at the food pantry, where Nolan would help sort canned goods and practice his counting. Nyla kept working, mornings at the cafe, afternoons teaching digital literacy, evenings with Nolan and Rebecca. Money was always tight, but they made it work. Rebecca's accounting job covered rent and basics. Nyla's income covered everything else. They didn't take vacations or buy new furniture or splurge on things they didn't need, but they were stable, safe, together. The community center became Nolan's second home. He knew everyone there, knew which seniors needed help with email, which teenagers were working on college applications, which kids were new and needed someone to show them where the art supplies were kept. Sophia called him mi ayudante, my helper. Thomas Santos saved the last empanada for him every Friday. Keisha, now in college, still came back to visit and would spend hours talking to Nolan about books and space, and whether dinosaurs could have survived if the asteroid had missed. Rebecca watched her daughter and grandson build this life, and sometimes she'd look at Nyla with something like awe, because she'd raised Nyla to be strong, but she hadn't taught her to do it alone. Nyla had figured that out herself, how to accept help without feeling weak, how to build community without losing independence, how to be both self-sufficient and connected. It was a kind of strength Rebecca recognized, the kind that didn't announce itself, the kind that just showed up every day and did what needed doing. The notification arrived on a Tuesday morning in November. Nyla was at the cafe, frosting cupcakes for a birthday order, when her phone buzzed. A news alert. She almost ignored it. News was usually distant problems that didn't touch Harborview. But something made her look. Thorn Foundation announces $50 million grant for regional hospital expansion. Her hands went still. Frosting dripped from the spatula back into the bowl. She read the article twice, then 3 times. The Thorn Foundation, Lucas's foundation, was funding a massive upgrade to Harborview Regional Hospital, new equipment, expanded emergency services, a dedicated pediatric wing. Construction started immediately, with Lucas himself overseeing the project to ensure it met community needs. He was coming here, to Harborview, maybe not permanently, but close enough that their paths could cross. Close enough that the careful distance she'd maintained for 7 years could collapse in a single moment. Her chest felt tight. Don't panic. Not exactly. Just the sudden awareness that the room she'd been waiting for might be arriving whether she was ready or not. David noticed her standing frozen. You okay? Yeah. Just processing something, good news or bad. I don't know yet. She finished the cupcakes on autopilot, delivered them to the customer, walked home through streets that suddenly felt different, like the town had shifted, while she wasn't looking, and now everything was slightly off-center. Rebecca was at work. Nolan was at school. The house was quiet. Nyla sat at the kitchen table and pulled out the folder she'd kept hidden in her closet. The returned letter, the newspaper article, the pregnancy test, all the evidence of a truth she'd been holding alone. She didn't open it, just rested her hand on the folder and tried to breathe. The exhaustion started small. An extra cup of coffee needed to get through the morning, a heaviness in her limbs that didn't lift after a full night's sleep, a persistent fog that made simple tasks feel harder than they should. Nyla ignored it. She was used to being tired. Single motherhood was tiring. Working 2 jobs was tiring. Keeping a household running was tiring. This was just more of the same. But it got worse. 3 weeks after the grant announcement, she nearly fainted while kneading bread. Caught herself on the counter, head swimming, vision going grey at the edges. David sent her home early. She slept for 12 hours straight and woke up feeling like she'd run a marathon. Rebecca noticed, started watching her with the quiet concern of mothers perfect over decades, started insisting she sit down more, drink water, eat something with actual nutritional value. "You're burning out," Rebecca said one evening. "I'm fine. You're not. And saying you are doesn't make it true." Nyla wanted to argue, but she was too tired to fight. The morning she collapsed in the kitchen, Nolan was eating breakfast. One moment she was standing at the stove, the next her knees buckled and the world tilted sideways. She heard Nolan scream, felt Rebecca's hands on her shoulders. Then, nothing. She woke up in an ambulance, Rebecca squeezing her hand, Nolan sitting very still in the jump seat with his backpack clutched to his chest and terror in his winter sky eyes. "You're okay," Rebecca kept saying. "You're going to be okay." But Nyla wasn't sure, because her body had finally given out, had finally said enough, and she'd been too stubborn to listen until it forced her to stop. The emergency room was controlled chaos. Doctors asking questions, nurses taking vitals. Someone inserted an 4 while someone else checked her blood pressure and someone else typed notes into a tablet. Nyla answered what she could. When did the symptoms start? Has she been eating regularly? Any history of anemia? Thyroid issues? Chronic conditions? The nurse who asked the questions had kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair. She worked efficiently but not hurriedly, like she understood that medical emergencies were still happening to actual human beings who needed gentle handling. "Your iron is extremely low," she said after the initial tests came back, "and you're showing signs of severe depletion. When's the last time you rested? Really rested?" Nyla tried to remember. Couldn't. The nurse nodded like she'd expected that answer. "You can slow down because you have a son. Not in spite of him. He needs you healthy more than he needs you hustling." The words landed like permission Nyla hadn't known she needed. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, Nolan still attached to her side. They'd been sent to the waiting area while doctors worked, but now visiting was allowed. Nolan climbed onto the bed carefully, like she was made of glass. "Are you okay, Mama?" "I will be, baby. I just need to rest for a bit. You work too much." Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. They ran more tests, kept her for observation, started her on iron supplements and fluids, made her promise to follow up with her primary care doctor and actually take time off work. David texted, "Take all the time you need. The cafe will survive." Sophia texted, "Already organizing a meal train. Don't argue." Thomas Santos texted, "We got you. Rest." The community showing up again. If this chapter resonates, share this with someone who needs a reminder to rest and ask for help. They were about to discharge her when the sliding doors at the end of the corridor opened. Nyla was sitting in a wheelchair, hospital policy, even though she could walk, waiting for Rebecca to bring the car around. Nolan stood beside her, one hand resting on the armrest, his backpack still strapped to his shoulders. The doors opened with that mechanical sound that all hospital doors make. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Multiple sets. Expensive shoes on linoleum. Nolan looked up first. His hand tightened on the wheelchair. His whole body went still in that way it did when he was processing something important. And then, in a voice barely louder than breath, he whispered one word that changed everything. "Daddy." Lucas Thorne stopped walking. The administrators beside him kept moving for 2 steps before they realized he wasn't with them anymore. They turned back, confusion crossing their faces. The woman with the tablet looked between Lucas and the pair by the wheelchair, trying to understand what had interrupted their tour. Lucas didn't notice them. His entire focus had narrowed to 2 people. A woman in a wheelchair with exhaustion written in every line of her body, and a small boy with a dinosaur backpack who was staring at him like he'd just solved a puzzle that had been missing pieces for years. Nyla watched recognition move across Lucas's face like weather. First, the slight widening of his eyes, then the way his lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Then something deeper, a shift in his expression that went beyond surprise into something more complicated. Realization, understanding, maybe even grief for all the time that had already passed. He looked at Nolan. Really looked. Studied the shape of his face, the color of his eyes, the way he stood with one hand on the wheelchair. Armrest like he was protecting his mother even though he barely reached her shoulder. And Nyla saw the moment Lucas knew. Not suspected, knew, because Nolan had his eyes. That exact shade of winter sky gray with flecks of blue that caught the light. The same serious expression when he was thinking. Even the way he tilted his head slightly when he was uncertain. Lucas did that too. One of the administrators cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne, we can continue the tour when you're—" Lucas raised one hand, silencing him without looking away from Nyla. "Give me a few minutes." It wasn't a request. The administrators exchanged glances, then retreated down the corridor. Their footsteps fading into the general noise of the hospital. The woman with the tablet hesitated. "Should the first—" "Wait with them," Lucas said quietly. "Please." She nodded and followed the others, casting one last curious glance over her shoulder. And then, it was just the 3 of them, in a hospital corridor, under overhead lights, with the whole world about to change. Lucas took 1 step forward, then stopped, like he was afraid of coming too close too fast. "Nyla," he said, just her name. But it carried 8 years of questions. She met his gaze. Steady, not apologetic, not defensive, just a present. "Lucas, are you okay? The nurses said you collapsed." Of all the things he could have asked first, who is this child? Why didn't? "That you tell me, how long have you known?" He asked about her health. And somehow, that small kindness loosened something in her chest. "I will be," she said. "Low iron, exhaustion, nothing that rest and supplements won't fix." He nodded slowly. Then his eyes dropped to Nolan again. The boy hadn't moved, hadn't said anything else, just kept watching Lucas with that intense, quiet focus. "Can I sit?" Lucas asked. Not to Nyla, to Nolan. Nolan looked up at his mother. She gave him a small nod. Permission to make his own choice. "Okay," Nolan whispered. There was a bench against the wall, about 6 feet away. Lucas walked to it and sat down, deliberately putting distance between them. Not hovering, not invading space, just making himself available at a level that felt less overwhelming. He set his leather bag on the bench beside him and pulled out a phone charger, the kind with multiple ports. He held it up slightly. "I noticed your phone earlier. On the gurney. The screen looked cracked. If you need to charge it, this works with most devices." It was such a small thing. Practical, unheroic. But it was the kind of detail that mattered when you were stuck in a hospital with a dying phone and a scared child. Nyla's phone was at 8%. She'd been so focused on Nolan and Rebecca and getting through the moment that she hadn't thought about charging it. "Thank you," she said. Lucas stood and brought the charger closer, plugging it into an outlet near the wheelchair. He handed her the cable, careful not to touch her hand, and returned to the bench. Nolan watched all of this with the careful attention he gave to everything that mattered. Lucas sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He didn't speak right away, just breathed, like he was trying to find the right words in a situation that had no script. Finally, he looked at Nyla. "I got your letter." Eventually, her breath caught. "What?" "It took 6 months to reach me. After the foundation closed, all the mail got forwarded to storage. Someone was supposed to sort it, but that person quit and it just sat there. When we finally went through everything, I found it. But by then I was 7 months pregnant and you were running a company," Nyla finished. "I tried to find you. Called at the community center. But you'd taken a leave after Nolan was born, and they wouldn't give me your personal information. Said it was policy. It is a policy. I know. I respected it. But I also didn't know if you wanted me to find you, if the letter was meant to be closure or an invitation. So I waited, and then years passed, and waiting became the choice I'd made without meaning to." Nolan watched this exchange like he was reading something important. His hands stayed on the wheelchair armrest, but his grip had loosened slightly. Nyla felt 8 years of carefully maintained distance begin to crack. Not collapse, just crack, letting light through. "I didn't hide him from you," she said quietly. "I tried to tell you. And when that didn't work, I made a choice to protect his story until there was a room big enough to hold it without turning it into something ugly." "I understand," Lucas said, and the way he said it, not defensive, not hurt, just accepting, made her believe he actually did. Lucas turned his attention to Nolan. Slowly, carefully, like approaching a creature that might startle. "What's your favorite subject in school?" he asked. Nolan blinked. Of all the questions he might have expected, that wasn't one of them. "Math." "Why math?" "Because it makes sense. There's always a right answer. You just have to find it." A smile flickered across Lucas's face. "I liked math too. Still do. What are you working on now?" "Fractions. And shapes. We learned that triangles are the strongest shape." "They are. Do you know why?" Nolan shook his head. Lucas reached into his bag and pulled out a pen and a small notebook. He drew 3 quick lines, forming a triangle. Because the force gets distributed evenly across all 3 points. Each point supports the others. It's balanced. He drew another shape. A square. This one looks strong, but if you push on one corner, it can collapse. The triangle doesn't do that. It holds. Nolan leaned forward slightly, interested despite himself. "What if one point breaks? Then you have to repair it. But if all 3 points are strong, the triangle can hold almost anything." Lucas looked up at Nyla, then back at Nolan. "Your mom is 1 point. You're another. And maybe I could be the 3rd. If that's okay with both of you." The metaphor landed. Simple. Clear. Not overwhelming. A 7-year-old could understand it. A woman who'd spent years protecting her son could see the intention behind it. Nolan looked at his mother. "Is it okay?" Nyla's throat felt tight. "We can try, but it takes time to build something strong, and we all have to agree on how it's built." "Okay," Nolan said. Then to Lucas, "Are you really my dad?" "I think so. But your mom and I need to talk more to make sure." "Is that okay?" Nolan nodded. "Okay." In high-stakes moments, what's one small kindness that made a difference for you? Drop it in the comments. Rebecca appeared at the end of the hallway, car keys in hand. She stopped when she saw Lucas sitting on the bench. Her eyes went sharp, protective, but she didn't say anything. "Just wait." Lucas stood. "You must be Rebecca Nyla's mother." "I am. I remember you. From the accounting department." "I remember you too." The air between them was careful, not hostile, just watchful. A grandmother assessing whether this man posed a threat to her daughter and grandson. Lucas seemed to understand. "I know this is complicated, and I know you don't have any reason to trust me yet, but I'd like to be here. If Nyla and Nolan are open to it." Rebecca looked at Nyla. A whole conversation happened in that look. "Are you okay? Do you want me to intervene? Do you need rescuing?" Nyla shook her head slightly. "I'm okay." "We're okay." Rebecca nodded. Then to Lucas, "We're taking her home. She needs rest. not stress. I understand. Do you? Rebecca's voice was kind but firm. Because my daughter has been doing this alone for 7 years. She's built a good life, a stable life, and I won't let anyone, no matter how much money they have, come in and disrupt that unless they're serious about being part of it. Not for a week, not until the next crisis calls, but actually part of it. I understand, Lucas said again, and I want to be. But I also know I can't just show up and expect everything to work because I finally found out the truth. This has to be built carefully, on Nyla's terms, on Nolan's timeline. Rebecca studied him for a long moment, then gave a single small nod. Good answer. She walked over to Nyla and began preparing to leave. Lucas stood awkwardly, clearly unsure whether he should help or stay back. Nolan solved the problem. He walked over to Lucas and held out his hand. Nice to meet you. Formal. Polite. The way Rebecca had taught him to greet adults. Lucas shook his hand gently. Nice to meet you too, Nolan. Will I see you again? Do you want to? Nolan thought about it, then nodded. Yeah, then yes. You'll see me again. Rebecca went to get the car. An orderly appeared to help with the wheelchair. The moment was dissolving, people moving toward exits, toward next steps, toward whatever came after this collision of past and present. Lucas stepped closer to Nyla, close enough to speak quietly. Can I be here today, tomorrow, however long it takes? Nyla looked at him, really looked, saw the exhaustion he was carrying too, the weight of running a company, of trying to do good work, in a system designed for profit, of discovering he had a son he'd missed 7 years with. She saw the sincerity, the fear, the hope, and she remembered what Mabel had said. Strong hearts don't need to carry everything alone. Start with being in the room, she said. Not fixing everything, not solving problems, just being present. Can you do that? He nodded. I can do that. Then yes. You can be here. Nolan tugged on her sleeve. Mama, can he come to Empanada tonight? Nyla almost laughed. Of all the ways to integrate a billionaire father into their lives, her son had chosen the most ordinary one. Friday night at the community center with $2 empanadas and folding chairs. If he wants to, she said. Lucas looked between them. I'd like that. Very much. The orderly returned with the wheelchair. Rebecca pulled up in the car. The hospital doors slid open, letting in autumn air and the sound of traffic. Nyla stood slowly, testing her legs. Steady enough. Lucas moved like he wanted to help, but stopped himself, giving her space to stand on her own. Nolan grabbed his dinosaur backpack and took his grandmother's hand. And Lucas watched them go, standing in the corridor as the doors closed, the triangle not yet complete but beginning to take shape. Lucas didn't follow them home that day. He gave them space, let them settle. Let the shock wear off before adding more weight to an already heavy moment. But he didn't disappear either. That evening, the local news ran a segment about the hospital grant. Nyla watched it from her couch, Nolan curled against her side, Rebecca in the armchair with her crossword puzzle. The reporter stood outside Harborview Regional Hospital, microphone in hand, explaining the $50 million expansion, new equipment, more staff, a pediatric wing that would serve 3 counties. Then the camera cut to Lucas. He stood in front of the hospital entrance, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn earlier, jeans and a sweater, nothing polished or staged, no suit, no tie, just a man talking about healthcare access like it mattered more than optics. This community has been underserved for too long, he said. The Foundation's goal is to make sure that where you live doesn't determine the quality of care you receive. Harborview deserves the same resources as any major city hospital. The reporter asked about his involvement. Will you be overseeing the project personally? I will. I'll be spending significant time here over the next year to ensure the expansion meets actual community needs, not just what looks good on paper. No mention of personal connections. No hint of the scene in the corridor. No exploitation of the moment for publicity. Just straightforward commitment to the work. Rebecca looked over at Nyla. He didn't mention you. I know. That was deliberate. I know. Nolan tilted his head up. Is he really going to be here for a year? Sounds like it. Does that mean we'll see him? Nyla smoothed his hair back. If you want to. But we're going to take it slow, one step at a time. Okay? Okay. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I hope it's okay that I got your number from your mom's employee file. I wanted to check in. How are you feeling? She stared at the message for a long moment. Then typed back. Tired, but okay. Thank you for asking. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Can I bring you anything? Groceries? Meals? I know you're supposed to rest. She almost said no. Almost fell back into the habit of handling everything herself. But then she remembered the nurse's words. You can slow down because you have a son. Iron-rich foods would help, but nothing fancy. Just regular groceries. I'll figure it out. No pressure to see me if you need space. Okay. The next morning, Lucas showed up at 9 o'clock with 2 bags of groceries and a notebook. Rebecca answered the door. I looked at him. I looked at the bags. Raised one eyebrow. Groceries, he said. Nyla mentioned she needed iron-rich foods. I wasn't sure what to get, so I called the hospital and asked to speak to the nurse who treated her yesterday. She gave me a list. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. She stepped aside. Come in. Nyla was on the couch, Nolan beside her with a coloring book. She looked better than yesterday, less pale, more alert, but still tired in a way that went deeper than one night's sleep. Lucas set the bags on the kitchen counter and pulled out the notebook. The nurse said iron, rest, and asking for help, so I wrote it down, along with the food list. He'd actually made a list, in careful handwriting, with check marks next to items he'd purchased. Spinach, lentils, red meat, fortified cereals, dark chocolate, orange juice for vitamin C to help absorption, cooking instructions for someone who clearly didn't cook often, but was trying to learn. Rebecca unpacked the bags. Everything was there. Good quality, nothing extravagant, just practical, helpful groceries chosen with attention to detail. You talked to the nurse, Nyla said. I did. Asked her to explain everything like I was 12 and hadn't paid attention in health class. She was very patient. What else did she say? Lucas flipped a page in his notebook. That depletion happens when people carry too much for too long without support. That your body doesn't fail randomly. It fails when you ignore its signals because you think you have to. And that recovery isn't just about supplements. It's about actually changing the patterns that led to collapse. He looked up from the notebook, met her eyes. She also said that the people around you need to step up so you can step back. So I'm here to step up. However that looks. Nolan had stopped coloring. He was watching Lucas with that serious expression, processing this new person in their space. Do you know how to cook? Nolan asked. Not well. But I can learn. Grandma's a good teacher. Rebecca made a sound that might have been a laugh. I suppose I could teach you to make lentil soup. If you're serious about being useful. I'm serious. Then wash your hands and come here. While Rebecca taught Lucas the basics of lentil soup, how to dice onions when, to add spices why you don't rush the simmer, Nyla watched from the couch. It was surreal. A billionaire in her kitchen, learning to cook from her mother, asking questions like a student who genuinely wanted to understand. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just a man trying to figure out how to be useful. Nolan eventually wandered over to help, explaining in great detail why you had to stir clockwise or the soup wouldn't taste right. Lucas listened with the same attention he'd given the nurse, nodding seriously, and following Nolan's instructions, even though they made no culinary sense. The soup simmered. The kitchen was filled with the smell of garlic and cumin. Rebecca made tea. Nolan set the table without being asked, placing napkins and spoons with careful precision. And Lucas sat down at their table. Not at the head, not in a position of authority, just in one of the 4 chairs, like he was trying to find his place in a constellation that had existed without him for years. Rebecca served the soup. It was good. Not perfect, but solid. The kind of meal that would become better with practice. I want to help more, Lucas said quietly. Not just with groceries, with everything. Medical bills, childcare. Whatever you need. Nyla set down her spoon. I don't need your money. I know, but I want to contribute. Not because you can't handle it, but because it's my responsibility too. I should have been contributing all along. You didn't know. I know that now. But the fact remains, you've carried the financial weight alone for 7 years. Let me help carry it forward. Rebecca watched this exchange carefully. Nolan ate his soup, eyes moving between the adults like he was watching a tennis match. We can talk about it, Nyla said finally, but not today. Today I need rest. And you need to prove you can show up consistently before we discuss anything long-term. Fair enough. Also, she added, no publicity. No press releases about supporting your newfound son. No photo opportunities at the community center. If you're going to be part of his life, you're part of his actual life. Not a version designed for good public relations. Agreed. This is private. It stays private unless you decide otherwise. Nolan spoke up. Can you come to Empanada tonight? Lucas looked at Nyla. She nodded. Then yes, he said to Nolan. I'd like that. After lunch, Rebecca took Nolan to the park. Give your mama some quiet time, she said, even though everyone knew she was giving Nyla and Lucas space to talk without small ears listening. They sat at the table with empty soup bowls and cold tea. The house felt bigger without Nolan's energy filling it. Nyla stood slowly and walked to her bedroom. Returned with the folder she'd kept hidden for 7 years. She set it on the table between them. Before we go any further, she said, you should see this. Lucas opened it carefully. The returned letter was on top. He read it slowly, and she watched his face shift, saw the moment he understood. How hard she'd tried, how thoroughly the systems around him had blocked her. Beneath the letter was the newspaper article announcing his CEO appointment, the pregnancy test, a list of baby names written in her handwriting, with Nolan Elias circled at the top, and at the bottom, a postcard, the lighthouse on the hill, the one she'd turned into a story for Nolan. On the back, in her handwriting, when the timing is right. Lucas touched the postcard gently. You kept all of this. I needed to remember that I tried, that I didn't just disappear without giving you a chance. I believe you, and I'm sorry it took this long. It's not your fault the letter didn't reach you. Maybe not, but I could have tried harder to find you after. I could have done more than wait. She appreciated that he didn't make excuses, didn't blame systems or circumstances entirely, just acknowledged the gap between what he could have done and what he did. We're here now, she said. That's what matters. He closed the folder carefully, pushed it back toward her. What do you need from me? Not what you think I want to hear, what you actually need. She thought about it. Really thought. Consistency, she said finally. Not grand gestures, not money or gifts or trying to make up for lost time all at once. Just showing up, being present, doing what you say you'll do. Nolan needs to know you're reliable, that if you promise to be at Empanada night, you're there. If you say you'll call, you call. He's had stability his whole life. I won't let anyone disrupt that, even his father, unless they can prove they're stable too. I can do that. Can you? Because your life is complicated. You run a company. You have obligations. And I'm not asking you to choose between your work and your son, but I am asking you to be honest about what you can actually commit to. It's better to promise less and deliver more than the other way around. Lucas leaned forward, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines that hadn't been there 8 years ago. I can't promise I won't have emergencies, or late nights, or meetings I can't reschedule, but I can promise that when I commit to being somewhere for Nolan, I'll be there, and if something truly unavoidable comes up, I'll communicate that clearly. Not disappear, not go silent, just be honest about what's happening. That's all I'm asking. If this story is hitting home, share it with someone who believes in second chances handled carefully. They sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just a present. Then Lucas said, I thought about you, after. More than I admitted to myself at the time. I thought about you too. Did you ever regret not trying harder to reach me? She considered the question. Sometimes, when money was tight or Nolan asked questions I couldn't answer, or I was just tired of doing everything alone, but mostly, no. Because I made the choice that felt right for him. And I'd make it again, even knowing how it turned out, even knowing, because he grew up safe, stable, loved, without the chaos of headlines or custody battles or being used as leverage. That mattered more than anything else. Lucas nodded slowly. He's a good kid. You did that. Rebecca and I did that. And the community. It takes more than one person. Will you let me be part of that? Going forward. She looked at him. Really looked. I saw the sincerity, the fear, the hope, the same things she'd seen in the hospital corridor. Yes, she said, but slowly. In Nolan's time. Not ours. Agreed. He reached across the table. Not to take her hand, that felt too soon, but just to rest his hand near hers, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to respect the distance. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long moment. Two people who'd loved each other once, briefly, in a way that had created something permanent, even though their relationship hadn't lasted. And then, without planning it, she leaned forward. He did too, until their foreheads touched. Just that. Just breathing the same air for a moment, sharing the weight of this impossible, beautiful, complicated thing they were trying to build. Can we do this? He whispered. I think so. If we're careful, I'll be careful. Me too. The front door opened. Nolan's voice called out, We're back! They pulled apart quickly, not guilty, just private. Some moments weren't meant for 7-year-old eyes yet. Nolan ran into the kitchen, cheeks flushed from the park. He looked at them sitting at the table, at the folder between them, at the way they were both smiling slightly. Are you guys fighting? He asked. No, baby, Nyla said. We're talking about how to be a family. Are we a family now? Lucas looked at Nyla. She nodded slightly. Permission to answer. We're working on it, Lucas said. Being a family takes practice, like math or building things. You have to make sure all the pieces fit right. Nolan climbed onto the chair beside Lucas, leaned against him without hesitation, the way kids do when they've decided someone is safe. Can we practice now? He asked. Lucas looked at Nyla. She smiled. Yeah, she said. We can practice. Nolan leaned forward until his elbows rested on both their knees. One small connection linking them together. Are we a team? Lucas reached over and ruffled his hair gently. We can be. If we practice. How do we practice? By showing up, Nyla said. By being kind. By telling the truth even when it's hard. By forgiving mistakes and trying again. That's how you build a team. Nolan thought about this, then nodded. Okay, let's practice. Rebecca appeared in the doorway with grocery bags. Who wants to help me make cookies? Me. Nolan jumped down and ran to help. Lucas stood. I should probably go. Let you rest. Thank you, Nyla said. For the groceries, for listening, for not making this harder than it needs to be. Thank you for letting me try. He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. Empanada night is Friday, 6 o'clock. Community center. I'll be there. Promise. I promise. And she believed him. After he left, Rebecca brought Nyla tea and a cookie still warm from the oven. What do you think? Rebecca asked. I think he's trying. Really trying. That's more than most men do. It is. Do you trust him? Nyla considered the question. I trust his intentions. I need to see if his actions match. But I think they will. He's different than he was 8 years ago. More grounded. Less swept up in his own momentum. And what about you? What do you feel? Hopeful, scared, exhausted. All of it at once. Rebecca squeezed her shoulder. That sounds about right. That night, after Nolan was asleep and Rebecca had retreated to her room, Nyla sat on her porch with the lighthouse postcard. When the timing is right. Maybe this was it. Not perfect timing, not easy timing, but the right timing. The kind that arrives when everyone involved has grown enough to handle what's being asked of them. She thought about Lucas learning to make soup, about the careful way he'd engaged with Nolan, about the promises he'd made without overreaching. She thought about the triangle, 3 points, all supporting each other, and she thought about practice, how you built something strong not by forcing it, but by showing up consistently, by trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. They wouldn't rush. They'd practice, and maybe, slowly, they'd build something that could hold. 6 months later, they stood on the pier at sunset, Nyla on one side, Lucas on the other, Nolan in the middle, holding both their hands. The water was calm tonight, no storm clouds on the horizon, just the steady rhythm of waves rolling toward shore and the salt air that always smelled like possibility. They'd walked here after empanada night, a tradition Lucas had kept without fail for 26 consecutive Fridays. Rain or shine, emergency meetings or exhaustion. He showed up, brought his own plate, sat with the community like he belonged there because he'd earned belonging through consistency, not bought it with donations. Nolan swung between them, feet lifting off the ground for brief seconds of flight. He was taller now, growing fast. I still had the dinosaur backpack, though it was showing wear. Still counted things when he was thinking. Still had those winter sky eyes that connected him to both his past and his future. "Can we go forward?" Nolan asked, tugging their hands toward the end of the pier. "Forward," Lucas said, smiling at Nyla over his head. "Not back." "Together," Nyla added. It had become their phrase, their reminder. The thing they said when decisions needed making or emotions got complicated or old patterns tried to resurface. Forward, not back. Together. They walked to the railing where the string lights swayed gently overhead. The same spot where Lucas and Nyla had kissed 8 years ago. Before everything fell apart. Before everything came back together. Nolan leaned against the railing, looking out at the water. "Do you think Clover is okay? We didn't see her today." "She's probably visiting someone else's block," Nyla said. "Dogs have their routines too. Like us." "Like us." Lucas pulled out the paper bag from Sophia's empanada stand. They'd bought extras. I always do now. Never knew who might need a meal or just want company. The bag rustled as he opened it. The smell of seasoned beef and warm pastry filled the air. Simple, familiar. The kind of comfort that came from shared rituals rather than grand gestures. "I have a question," Nolan said, not looking away from the water. "Go ahead," Lucas said. "Are you my dad now? Like, officially?" Nyla and Lucas exchanged a glance. They'd done the DNA test 3 months ago, not because they doubted, the eyes told the story clearly enough, but because it mattered for medical history, for school records, for the legal framework that protected everyone involved. The results had confirmed what they already knew. Lucas was Nolan's biological father. They'd told Nolan together, in simple language, with Rebecca present for support. "Yes," Lucas said. "Officially. The test confirmed it, but more importantly, I'm showing up. That's what makes someone a dad. Not just biology, but being present. Do I have to call you Dad? Only if you want to. You can call me Lucas, or we can come up with something else. Whatever feels right to you." Nolan thought about it. "Can I try different things and see what fits?" "Absolutely." "Okay." He paused. "Do you have other kids?" "No. Just you. Do you want more?" Lucas looked at Nyla, a question they hadn't discussed yet. Might never discuss. The shape of their relationship was still forming. Co-parents who cared about each other, who were rebuilding trust, who were taking things slowly despite the pull toward something more. "I'm happy with the family I have," Lucas said carefully. "But that's a conversation for another time. Right now, I'm focused on being the best dad I can be to you." Nolan nodded. Satisfied, he took an empanada from the bag and bit into it, letting the conversation settle into comfortable silence. The hospital expansion was ahead of schedule. The new pediatric wing would open in 3 months. State-of-the-art equipment, rooms designed with input from actual families, a playroom that didn't feel institutional. But Lucas had built more than buildings. He'd started a paid work-study program at the hospital, High school students from Harborview and surrounding towns could work part-time, learn healthcare administration, and earn money for college. Keisha was the first hire. She'd graduated with honors and planned to study public health. Now she was training other students, teaching them what she'd learned, creating a pipeline of young people who understood both healthcare and their communities. The program had expanded beyond the hospital. The community center now had funding for digital literacy classes with paid student assistance. The food pantry had a delivery service run by local teenagers who earned hourly wages. Sophia's empanada nights had grown into a full catering business that employed 6 people. Lucas hadn't done this alone. He'd listened, asked what the community actually needed rather than assuming, funded solutions that came from the people who lived here, not from outside consultants who'd never walked these streets. And he'd done it quietly. No press releases, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies with his name on plaques, just resources flowing to where they'd make a difference, with credit going to the people doing the actual work. Rebecca had been hired as the program coordinator. She'd retired from accounting to oversee the new initiatives, making sure money went where it was supposed to, that young people were paid fairly, that the programs served real needs rather than looking good on paper. "You're better at this than I am," Lucas had told her during one of their weekly meetings. "That's because I live here," Rebecca had replied. "I know these people. You're just learning. Then, teach me." And she had. The hospital expansion included something rarely seen in rural healthcare: comprehensive language access and transportation. It started with a conversation. Lucas had been sitting in on a community feedback session when Thomas Santos mentioned that his sister avoided the hospital because she didn't speak English well and the interpreters were only available during business hours. "What if someone needs care at night?" Thomas had asked. "Or on weekends? They just suffer." Lucas had written it down, then acted on it. Now the hospital had round-the-clock interpretation services in 6 languages. Not just phone interpreters, actual people who could explain medical information clearly, help with paperwork, advocate for patients who didn't know how to navigate the system. They'd also launched a transportation program, volunteer drivers, a shuttle service, partnerships with rideshare companies to provide free rides for medical appointments. Because access to healthcare wasn't just about having a hospital nearby. It was about being able to actually get there. Nyla had helped design the transportation program. She knew which neighborhoods were underserved, which seniors couldn't drive anymore, which families were choosing between gas money and groceries. She'd mapped the routes, recruited drivers, built a scheduling system that worked on old phones, not just smartphones, made sure the program served the people who needed it most, not just the ones who were easiest to reach. Working together had been strange at first. Professional distance mixed with personal history. But they'd figured it out. I learned to communicate clearly, to respect boundaries, to focus on the work rather than what might or might not be developing between them. And something was developing, slowly, in the margins, in the way Lucas looked at her when she was explaining something she cared about, on the way she caught herself smiling when his name appeared on her phone. In the careful way they didn't rush, didn't push. Just let whatever was growing take its time. The neighbor's kitchen rotation started after Nyla's collapse. Sophia had organized a meal train that lasted 3 months. Different families cooking, different styles of food, all of it showing up on Nyla's doorstep with notes that said things like reheat at 350 and freeze well and no need to return the dish. But then something shifted. The rotation became permanent, not just for Nyla, but for everyone. Every month, a different family hosted a community dinner. Nothing fancy, just a chance to gather, eat together, share what was happening in their lives. Sometimes 20 people showed up, sometimes 5. It didn't matter. The point was showing up. Lucas had been nervous the first time he hosted. His apartment in town was nice, but not huge. He'd hired a catering company before Nyla stopped him. "That's not the point," she'd said. "The point is that you cook, or try to, and if it's terrible, we'll order pizza and laugh about it." So, he'd made pasta, from scratch, with Rebecca coaching him through video call. It was lumpy and overcooked, and absolutely perfect, because he'd made it with his own hands for people who mattered. Nolan had helped. Measured ingredients, stirred sauce, set the table with careful precision. And when Sophia took a bite and declared it not bad for a beginner, Nolan had beamed with pride like they'd won an award. The rotation taught them all something important. Community wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up regularly, about letting people see you try and fail and try again, about building trust through consistency, rather than impressing people through performance. They sat on the pier, finishing the empanadas as the sun touched the horizon. Nolan had grease on his chin. Lucas had a spot of sauce on his sweater. Nyla's hair was coming loose from its ponytail. They looked like a family, not a perfect one, just a real one. "What did you learn today?" Nyla asked Nolan. It was their nightly question. Had been since he was 3. "That fractions are easier when you use food," he said. Mrs. Patterson cut a pizza into 8 pieces, and it made so much sense. What else? He thought about it. Tommy's mom is having a baby, and he's worried because babies cry a lot. So I told him it gets easier, that he'll be a good big brother if he practices being patient. Lucas smiled. "That's good advice. Mama taught me that." "About practicing. She's smart." "I know." Nyla felt her throat tighten. These moments, small and ordinary, and absolutely everything, were what she'd been protecting all along. Not Nolan's innocence exactly, but his chance to grow up is steady, to learn that love was a consistent presence, not dramatic declarations. That family was built through daily choices, not genetic lottery. "What did you learn?" Nolan asked Lucas. Lucas leaned back against the railing. That showing up matters more than showing off. That people remember the small kindnesses more than the big announcements. That being useful is better than being impressive. Did someone teach you that? Your mom did, and your grandma, and this whole town really. What about you, Mama? Nolan turned to Nyla. What did you learn? She looked at her son, then at Lucas, then out at the water. I learned that asking for help isn't a weakness, that timing matters, but so does trying, that you can protect someone's story without hiding the truth forever. That love looks different than I thought it would. Quieter, steadier, built in the details rather than the headlines. That's a lot of learning, Nolan said. It is, but that's what life is, just learning and practicing and trying again when you mess up. Do grown-ups mess up a lot? All the time, Lucas said. The trick is admitting it and fixing it instead of pretending you didn't. Nolan nodded seriously. Like when I broke Grandma's mug and told her right away instead of hiding it. Exactly like that. What lesson are you taking from this story? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what's landing for you. The walk back from the pier took longer than necessary. They stopped to pet someone's dog, to look at the flowers blooming in window boxes, to let Nolan climb the low wall that ran along the street, arms out for balance. They passed the community center. Lights were on inside. Someone's art class, someone's support group, someone's gathering that mattered enough to show up for. I have a question, Nolan said, jumping down from the wall. Another one? Nyla teased gently. Yeah. How come people don't call you Mr. Thorne at empanada night? They just call you Lucas. Lucas smiled. Because that's my name. Mr. Thorne is the title. It tells people I run a company, but it doesn't tell them who I am as a person. Here, I'm just Lucas, someone who shows up on Fridays and helps fold chairs and sometimes burns the coffee. But you're still important. I have responsibilities, yes, but that doesn't make me more important than anyone else. Thomas runs a bodega. Sophia makes empanadas. Your mom teaches people how to use computers. We're all doing work that matters, just different work. So, titles don't matter. They matter for certain things, but they don't tell you about someone's character. That's why your mom wanted me to show up here before we told you I was your dad. She needed to see if I was the kind of person who would actually be a good father. Not just someone with money and a fancy job title. Nolan processed this. And are you a good father? I'm trying to be. Am I doing okay so far? Yeah, you're doing pretty good. Pretty good is all I'm aiming for. They reached the duplex. The porch light was on. Rebecca was visible through the window, reading in her chair. "Can Lucas come in?" Nolan asked. Nyla looked at Lucas. He'd been respecting boundaries carefully, coming for specific events, but not assuming he could just show up whenever, letting Nolan and Nyla set the pace. "For a little while," she said, "but it's a school night, so not too late." They went inside. Rebecca looked up from her book and smiled. "How was the pier?" "Good," Nolan said. "We talked about learning and titles and character, deep topics for a Friday night." "We're a deep family," Nolan said seriously, and they all laughed. Later, after Nolan had brushed his teeth and put on pajamas and climbed into bed, Lucas read him a story. One about a mouse who built a house from things other animals didn't need anymore. Found objects turned into something sturdy and warm. Nolan's eyes grew heavy. He yawned. "Lucas?" he said sleepily. "Yeah. I'm glad you came back, even though it took a long time." Lucas's voice caught. "Me too, buddy. Me too. Mama says timing matters. That sometimes things happen when they're supposed to, not when we want them to. Your mama's right about a lot of things." "I know." His eyes closed. "Good night." "Good night, Nolan." Lucas stayed until Nolan's breathing evened out. Then he stood carefully and walked to the living room where Nyla and Rebecca were drinking tea. "He called you by name," Rebecca observed. "He did." "We're still figuring out what feels right." "That's good. Let him lead." They sat quietly for a moment. Then Rebecca stood. "I'm heading to bed. Lucas, lock the door when you leave. Nyla needs to rest more than she admits." "I heard that," Nyla said. "Good. Then listen to it." Rebecca disappeared down the hall. Her door clicked shut. Nyla and Lucas sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only happens when people have stopped performing and started just being. "You're good with him," Nyla said. "I'm learning. He's patient with me. Kids are truth-tellers. They see through performance. That's why I needed you to show up here first. He'd know if you were faking it." "I'm not faking." "I know." He knows too. That's why this is working. Lucas set down his tea. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Are you really resting, or are you just better at hiding the exhaustion?" She smiled tiredly. "A little bit of both, but I'm trying. Taking the afternoons off helped, not working doubles anymore. Actually accepting help when people offer it. That's progress." "It is. Turns out rest is a strategy, not a failure. It took me almost collapsing to learn that, but I learned it. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself." "Me too. Nolan needs me around. So does Rebecca. So does this community. Can't do any of that if I burn out completely." He nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm trying to learn that too. I used to think success meant never stopping, never slowing down. But being here taught me that constant motion isn't the same as meaningful progress. Look at us, learning together. Forward, not back. Together." Lucas stood to leave. Nyla walked him to the door. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Same time next week. And the hospital board meeting on Wednesday? I'll be there. Wouldn't miss hearing you explain budget allocations in a language regular people can understand." He laughed. "Rebecca taught me that too. Turns out jargon is just a way to avoid being clear. She's full of wisdom." "She is." He opened the door, stopped, turned back. "Nyla." "Yeah? Thank you. For letting me try again. For not giving up on the idea that I could be part of this. You earned it. By showing up, by being consistent, by proving your character through actions instead of just promising things. Still, thank you." She smiled. "You're welcome. Now go home and get some rest. You look tired." "Right back at you." "I'm working on it." He left. She watched him walk to his car, a modest sedan now, not the luxury vehicle he'd driven 8 years ago. He'd learned that too, that fitting in mattered more than standing out. She locked the door, turned off the lights, checked on Nolan one more time. He was sleeping soundly, dinosaur backpack hanging on the bedpost ready for tomorrow. and she went to bed with the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived. Not perfect, not dramatic, just steady. Forward, not back. Together. 3 months later, the pediatric wing opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small. No media circus. Just community members and hospital staff and the families who'd fought for better healthcare access for years. Nolan got to cut the ribbon. Lucas had suggested it, that the first person through the doors should be a child who represented why the wing existed. Not a billionaire. Not a politician. Just a kid from Harborview who deserved the best care available. The local paper ran a small article. No mention of Lucas and Nyla's relationship. No gossip about the CEO and the single mom. Just a straightforward story about community investment and what was now possible, exactly as they'd wanted it. The programs continued. The work, study students. The transportation services. The neighbor kitchen rotation. Small things that added up to change that mattered. Keisha got into her first-choice college with a full scholarship. She came back to visit and told Nolan he should think about healthcare too, that the world needed people who understood both medicine and humanity. Thomas Santos's sister started coming to the hospital regularly, getting treatment she'd avoided for years. Her health improved. She started volunteering at the food pantry, paying forward the care she'd received. Sophia's catering business grew. She hired 3 more people, started offering cooking classes at the community center, taught people that good food didn't have to be expensive or complicated, just made with attention. Rebecca continued coordinating the programs, making sure resources reached the people who needed them, holding everyone accountable, including Lucas, when systems started to drift back toward convenience instead of effectiveness. And Nyla kept teaching, kept showing up, kept building the life she'd always wanted. Stable, meaningful, connected, now with one more person in the constellation. The triangle held. 1 year after the hospital corridor moment, they returned to the pier. Same spot, same string lights, different season. Spring instead of autumn, but the water looked the same. Nolan was 8 now. Taller, reading at a middle school level, still counting things, still asking questions that required thoughtful answers. He stood between them again, holding both their hands. "Are we still practicing?" he asked. "Always," Nyla said. "Being a family is something you practice forever. You don't stop just because you get good at it. Like math. Exactly like math. You keep learning new things, harder things, but the basics stay the same." Lucas squeezed his hand gently. "What's your favorite part so far, of us being a family?" Nolan thought about it. "That you both show up to the things that matter, and that you tell me the truth even when it's complicated, and that we practice together instead of just pretending everything is perfect." Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds, the sun was setting again, painting the water gold and pink. The empanada bag rustled in the breeze. Somewhere down the beach, someone was playing guitar. They stood there, mother, father, son, watching the day end and tomorrow begin. Not perfect, not uncomplicated, not the story Nyla had imagined when she was pregnant and alone, but better, because it was real, because it was built on truth, handled carefully, on love expressed through details, on strength found in asking for help, on character proven through consistency, forward, not back, together. And that was enough. Drop your team word in the comments. Steady. That's what this story is about, building something steady, choosing consistency over flash, proving love through daily choices instead of grand gestures. Before we close, I want to say thank you for staying with this story. These are the tales that matter, not because they're loud or sensational, but because they're true to how real people build real lives. If this resonated with you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances can work when they're handled with care. And subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss next week's story. Next week, he left a $1 tip. Then the waitress noticed the ring on his little finger. A story about assumptions, dignity, and the moment everything you thought you knew shifts. Until then, remember, Love is built in the details. Truth deserves a careful room. And the strongest structures are built slowly, with all 3 points supporting each other. Good night, family. See you next week.